We are talking to Matt Rubin, the CEO of Red Rabbit Games, to understand a little bit more about what Red Rabbit does, some of their new 3D platformer, Unsent, how that's coming to life, and what is coming up for this company. Matt, thanks so much for taking some time out.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. So for those who maybe aren't in the loop yet, tell us a little bit about Red Rabbit Games, how you founded it as CEO, and what your kind of main pitch is.
Sure. It's a pretty big loop, so I'll try to shorten it up a bit. But I generally, like even in college, just been sort of enamored with like the sort of startup culture, this idea of asking forgiveness, not permission kind of thing. We did a few startups in college that really sort of disrupted the way our college operated. This was like back, the fun origin stories, like from back in the day when people still had textbooks and you'd sell them back at the end of the semester. This sort of entrepreneurship club on campus set up outside of the bookstore, called the publisher to find our buyback rates, and just started offering students a higher buyback price. And so we completely undercut the school store. School store got mad, ended up buying us out to make us not do it again. And at that point, like I was hooked. I'm like, this entrepreneurship thing is awesome. And so over the past basically 20 years, I've just been fairly like industry agnostic, doing everything from a social sports company that at first was just like local to Boston, ended up selling it to a national brand. And I was there for a couple of years, sort of building this sort of like next level mobile app that let players sort of drop in and find like sort of subs for teams that they were running. I did a mental health startup that's been operating for almost a decade now. I did a like marketing AI tech, like well before AI was cool, that like we hit the market and people were like, absolutely not. We're not touching this thing. I don't know how it works. Fast forward, everyone's touching AI and still no one knows how it works. So I've been sort of in the space for a while, or like in the startup space for a while in all sorts of industries. And I recently found myself in that place of like, well, shit, what do I do next? Having been in a lot of different roles in different industries, and I find myself a little bit of a jack of all trades, master of none, which makes it really hard when you're applying for jobs. Like I've held C-level positions, but like no big company is going to hire some like startup guy as a C-level position. So I tend to just invent my own jobs. And I like played games. Like I remember getting a Nintendo when I was like 5. And then like, every Christmas we'd like bring up whatever console we had and played it on the big TV. And it was fun and exciting. So I'd always loved playing games. It was always like sort of my escape, like being a business-minded person. Like I go to sleep thinking about business problems, and like it ends up making me not able to go to sleep. I end up just like thinking for hours and hours. And so gaming is like the one thing that like lets my brain just completely shut off from like stresses with my family, stresses with work, and just like relax. And so I was like, man, I should really turn the thing that helps me relax into a stressful business venture. So that's what I did. So I, can't just, no good entrepreneur, I feel like, enters with like, I'm going to do the same thing that everyone else is going to do. And so I was kind of looking at the space, thinking like, oh, I want to start a game studio, but what are the problems in the industry? And what I started to see really quickly was this sort of feast or famine nature for the indie studios that, I think it's something like 10,000 games on Steam have an 80% positive review rate or higher, and their studios never made it to build the second game. And that's just like very indicative of just this feast or famine problem. And unpacking sort of why that problem exists is what got me really excited about the opportunity here. And so I quickly landed on this idea of like starting an accelerator of like, how do we help these indie studios be more fuel efficient? Like how can they deploy whatever limited resources they have better? And I was like ready to go launching this accelerator. And I sort of had a pause of like, while I've done software before, I know nothing about the game dev space. So maybe I should figure that out first before I go teach other people how to do it. So that's where I met this small studio in Worcester. And by like studio, I mean, it was like 5 people who made a website, and that was it. So I'm talking to them like, hey, have you guys incorporated? They're like, what's incorporated? I'm like, okay, great. that problem solved. I can help you with that. You know, do you have legal representation? They're like, no, why would we? I'm like, okay, great. So it sort of was indicative of like the entire space where it's like either these students who are graduating and can't or don't want a job at AAA or can't get a job at AAA, need to start something to do something, and they don't know anything about business, or you have these like AAA cast-offs because the layoffs have been pervasive, who are like super siloed and maybe they know animations really well, but they don't really understand the rest of the game process, and they certainly don't understand the business process. And so the idea for Red Rabbit came about of like, let's build a studio this year, and then next year we're going to launch an accelerator to teach other indie studios what they don't know about business, and basically like a 1-year highly catered MBA to how to run a game.
Where maybe let's start is that experience of getting into the game space with that sort of business background. Like you said, you have led from the C-level positions, multiple companies. Your LinkedIn is readily available for people to see your level of expertise there. And mixing that ability to solve business problems with what is, at the time, I imagine, a very unfamiliar industry in the games space, and starting to understand how best to function in that environment, I imagine had to be an interesting challenge. So from your perspective, when you were ramping that up, founding Red Rabbit, trying to get your feet in and understanding that core mission of it, what were some of the ways that you drew upon that previous business experience you had to sort of get it off the ground? And then how did you go about slotting yourself into the games industry in the position where you currently sit, and sort of figuring it out almost from the ground floor, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I'll try my best to answer that one without straying too far from the original question. I think there's two keys for me. I think two for like what makes a good startup. One, when you tell your idea to people, they need to come. Their response needs to be like, "Well, duh, why didn't I think of that?" Some of the best businesses are like, "Crap, like I could have come up with that idea." Right? Like you walk into like modern art, exhibits, and you're like, "I could do that." That's what a good startup should be. And so, with like the mental health company, the pitch is, we should take like the same care that we take with our bodies, with our teeth, with our cars, of like, primary care for our bodies, preventative dentistry for our teeth, oil changes for our car, regular maintenance. Like, why don't we take that same approach with mental health? When I tell that to people, they're like, well, duh, that makes sense. We should do that proactively. You look at the gaming space, and it's, all these non-business people starting businesses. And it's like, man, wouldn't it be better if they had a business person or like some sort of business background to help them along the way? Or, as a small studio of developers, do you really need a full-time marketing person? Do you really need a full-time finance and like accounting person? Do you really need a full-time legal, HR, like all these different sort of business tasks that I would assume most developers don't even really think about because they're at the time, because they're like, I've got a great idea for a game. I just want to build it. We'll figure out the rest in flight, which is the great entrepreneurial spirit. That's sort of the other thing, is like, you need people who are willing to figure it out mid-flight. The problem is like finding that business person that can do all of that stuff, I think is rare. I think it's like, and to do it well. And so I don't know, pat my own back a little bit that like, I think I can do enough of those things well enough that I can get companies off the ground. But then when it gets to like a bigger company, that's where it's like too much bureaucracy, too much red tape. I want to ask forgiveness, not permission. That doesn't fly at bigger companies. So like, I need to pull the ripcord at that point and get somewhere else. So I think sort of that's what I was seeing in the space, was like basically every indie studio I spoke to, which like the indie game space, like the people in the industry are awesome. Everyone is like so collaborative and like willing to help each other. No one views each other as competitors for some reason, which is great. I think because people play so many games, like there are enough eyeballs or dollars to go around. It's super competitive, but like no one views it that way. So I met all these great like CEOs who were engineers first, and they just had to like fail their way up. And it's really hard to fail your way up if you don't have financial backing, or if you're like relying on the success of one game to like parlay into the success and funding of another game. And that was sort of the crux of what I saw, was that gaming is the one industry really that pitches products and not a business model. And I think it's because all their business models are the same. I'm going to build a game. I'm going to release it on Steam. Maybe I'll do it on console. I'll cross my fingers that it makes money. Then I'll go raise money with another vertical slice and do it again. And it's this industry stuck. You watch Shark Tank, everyone else comes in, they pitch a product, they get told, you're just pitching a product, not a business. Come back when you have a business. For some reason, the status quo in gaming is like, just pitch us a product and we'll go. But like the ability to turn around an ROI for those investors quickly enough that like they'll be willing to fund your next game is essentially impossible. Like, you're not going to take $1 million investment, release a game and make $1 million in your first month, and then be able to go back to your investors and be like, now I need $2 million to build my next game. Like, it takes too long to make $1 million in the gaming space that like your investors are going to laugh you out of the room because they haven't seen a penny back yet. So hopefully that answered your question. I don't know if I answered like how I specifically inserted myself, but I don't know.
No, I think that was good. And what's interesting there that you mentioned was how there is often that gap from a developer's perspective in terms of the business and the resource and the practicality requirements that go into, what makes the reality of game development what it is, right? You having some degree of versatility and expertise in that area makes a lot of those hurdles a lot easier to clear, where you're not having to figure this stuff out yourself, making missteps you wouldn't have otherwise, saving yourself time and money along the way, a lot of stress, I'd imagine, as well. So putting it in the context of the latest, bid on offer Unsent here, walk us through the process of how you and the rest of Red Rabbit have been assisting with Unsent's development, walking the developers through some of these more business-minded actions and things they need to concern themselves with and educating them along the way. Can you walk us through how that's gone with them to date?
So that's also a good way to like tie in sort of how I've inserted myself in with previous experiences too. So most other industries, you like stress test your product. You like get a, beta, right? By the time most games are beta testing, game's basically done. Like, you've been working on this thing for like potentially years before you enter beta. It's a little late to be like drastically reworking. In a more traditional, like product facing, even like a SaaS company, right? Like, they're getting their UI, UX in front of a group of potential customers and watching them like play with a prototype before you even write a line of code. That doesn't exist in gaming. Like, you just can't, right? You have to write some code. You actually have to build some stuff. Even like a white box isn't a very good indication of like what the game can be. And so that was the mindset we took with Unsent of like, we just need to get something out there and start getting user feedback on like what went well, what didn't go well, really understanding like what part of our dev cycle went well and what didn't go well. Like, what are the strengths and weaknesses of our team when we're building our next game? Like, how can we lean into those strengths and like mitigate those concerns or like those growth edges for the team? And I think that's where it's really hard for indie devs who start their studio because of a passion around a specific game or an idea. It's like, you love this thing and you want to build this thing. When in the reality is most studios that make it don't make it until they produce their third game. And so if you spend all your time and money and energy and like stress and love on this first game, like statistically speaking, it's not going to do well. And so for us, like, we found this team Slimeware out in Worcester who like had the bones of a game that like, okay, we can build upon this. It's good enough. Like, we can continue to make this a pretty good game and learn along the way. And so we basically set up a series of experiments that we wanted to run of like, here are the different things we're going to experiment with from a marketing standpoint. Here are the things we're going to experiment with on like an engineering and like DevOps, like, project management standpoint. And we are going to like basically every 3 months sit down and assess what things work, what didn't work, and what hypotheses we need to change and retest. And so we were really coming at this from like a science approach, and like Unsent is our Frankenstein, science baby that we've like released upon the world to see what it's going to become. But I think the other part of what I thought was so interesting about getting into this space is that they're actual humans coding the games that we all love to play. And it's like every week some game comes out and the internet just like destroys this game and they just like rip the developers to shreds. And having peeked behind the curtain, every dev agonizes over everything that they do and produce and put into the game. And like we are really hoping to sort of humanize and connect with the players of the game. And so to me, we've got this great opportunity where like we're really trying to build up our own Discord of like, if you want us to build a game, join our Discord and tell us what it is. Like, let's work on this together. Like, let's get that feedback directly from players on Unsent and figure out, like, one of the experiments we're running is like, can we convert people who are commenting on our Steam page to Discord users and actually get their feedback to actually implement improvements to the game and see if it does better. And so, I don't know, long-winded answer yet again. But I think like, I'm trying to take this, I played this video for every company. I've started 7 companies now. For every company I've started, I played this video by Derek Silvers. If you YouTube shirtless dancing guy video, I would be very, it could just be because I've searched it 1,000 times, but that's what comes up is this Derek Silvers video. And it's all about like how to start a movement. And it's about how like you really need to embrace those first people who join you, right? It's like you should watch the video on your own. I encourage any listener to like pause and watch it. But that's the moment we're at where like we put something out into the world and these first people who are buying it and commenting are the people we need to embrace and hug and like, yes, tell us more, give us all the feedback, like, and let's just get better every time. And so I think, being able to understand that Unsent is just our first game, not our only game. And like, we need to keep building and learning from that, I think is the mindset new studios need to go into. Like, they can't blow it all on their first game. Like, you've got to keep stuff in reserves and you have to be building momentum and building traction because investors invest off of traction. And like, you're going to have no traction the day you press go live on Steam. You have zero traction. You built a game, terrific, good for you. You still have zero traction. And so we need to keep showing that we're gaining knowledge, momentum, and traction with our players and like with our own skill sets in order to like build a sustainable business.
Again, you're speaking a lot to the sort of realities of game development, especially for those who want to convert their passions into a sustainable, profitable business venture for themselves and assumably for the people, within their employer that they're working alongside to make, full-on careers out of it. A big part of that process, obviously, is having access to platforms like Steam and processes like the early access process to get exactly what you're saying, a little bit of that traction. People get a foot in the door. You start to get feedback. You start to understand what works, what doesn't. Are we on the right track? What do we need to rethink? All these kinds of things. So getting into that early access process, once you have something that's polished up enough and complete enough to show, I imagine has to be pretty nerve-wracking, especially when it's your first crack at the first bite at the apple here, so to speak. So can you walk through from your perspective the process of prepping, organizing for, and releasing something into Steam Early Access, and what, again, from your perspective, the reception and the experience has been like thus far now that, the game's had a few days to get out into the world?
Sure. I think it's worth noting that while in college, people might think I was a business major, but I figured I'd end up in business. So it was pointless for me to start 4 years early. So I ended up majoring in international development and social change, which like basically we were taking like macro level problems and trying to figure out how to like world hunger. How do we solve world hunger? Like most people stop there because it's too big of a problem. So we couldn't do that because that was the whole point of the major. So we actually like tried to break down how would we actually solve world hunger into like, what can we do today to do that? And what can we do tomorrow? And so we sort of looked at this idea of like, we need to get to game 3. Whatever we need to do, we need to get to game 3. And so that was our goal. And then we worked backwards. Like, okay, if we have 1 year worth of runway, that means we have 3 to 6 months to finish game 1, 3 to 6 months to finish game 2. And then we'll be started game 3 by the end of the year. And hopefully we'll have enough traction that we can raise money and someone will think, hey, they made it to their 3rd game. Now they're actually going to make money. And so basically we set an October 1st deadline for release back in like mid-April. And I'd like just met the Slimeware guys who had like shown me a vertical slice. I was totally like the video game investors. They're like, check out this vertical slice. I'm like, these look cooler than other games I've seen demoed at like demo days and little like, indie dev meetups. Like, this is cool. Let's try this. And so I was like, hey, October 1st. And they're like, there's no way. There's no way we can finish this game on October 1st. I'm like, cool, try. Like, let's learn. I think you can do it. You've got 5 months. I think you can do it. Let's see what happens. And so we backed in from October 1st to like, what are the different milestones we want to hit along the way? And so like the next thing was like, okay, we've got PAX East coming up. That was like mid-May, I think. It's like, okay, or early May. We need a demo playable by like May 1st. Hit that deadline. And then it was like, okay, we need to have like closed beta a month before release. In order to do that, we need to have like something like worth having like an alpha for, like by, I think it was like mid-July, so that we could polish it and like start building out other stuff. So we like backed into all these deadlines. Turns out we found Next Fest was going to be the 13th through the 20th. And so we put back release from the 1st to the 20th. And I think that was a good move. But like we sort of set our target on the 20th, and then was sort of backdated all these other deadlines along the way. And so like we got to a point where the game was good. We had levels that were fun and like, got your heart rate up and were exciting. And like for a non 3D platformer player like myself, I was like, this is actually pretty good. Like I'm excited to sit down and play like the next, the next dev build that we have. So we got there and we had some ideas on like the other features, the other like levels that we could build, but I'm big on this, like, let's put it out into the world and get real world feedback. In other companies that I've like started and run, we've always sort of taken the like, whoever our first customers are, we're probably going to piss off. Like we're going to do like the platform's not going to be good. The product's not going to be good. Like we're going to convince them to take a chance on us and we're probably going to let them down. So this was sort of our like, let's just release this and see how it goes. And like, luckily, or I think early access sets the expectation that like, we're going to keep building and we're going to listen to feedback. In other companies, when you're like doing B2B sales, like if you don't impress them in the first like month or two of working together, like you're not going to get your contract renewed. They're not going to expand. I think early access is a really unique way to actually get real world feedback on your game. So you're not just developing in a vacuum. And I think it's hard for indie studios to have massive QA teams, have massive like beta, like our beta was like 35 people. And that was like hard for us to get 35 people who are like willing to like play and give us feedback. So this was a way for us to like get some people with skin in the game to actually like put money up to play our game, and therefore they're incentivized to like give us feedback and be those first followers. And so for us, it was like, we think we've got something here, but we're obviously biased. And so like, if we can convince other people that we've got something here, it at least teaches us like what we should continue to build for Unsent and like what things are working well so that we can understand that for game 2. And so you asked like, how was this reception so far? I set my expectations incredibly low, and so low that like the dev team, I'm pretty sure, hated my pessimism. And I'm generally an optimist, but I'm like indoctrinated with this idea that we're not going to make money until our third game. And so like, hey, if Unsent does anything, I'll be thrilled. And like we released 2 days ago, we've had like 130 buyers. We were hoping to hit 300 in the first week, and I think we're going to pass that. And the feedback has been like overwhelmingly positive, which I know is great for the algos on Steam, but like everyone's commenting stuff that like, hey, this was actually really fun. We really enjoyed it. I can't wait to play more, which is like music to our ears of like, it's really great to have people we don't know tell us things they like. And the things that people are like, I wish this was different, are things that we also suspected were different, or like we suspected we wished we could like improve. And it's validating to be like, yes, these are the issues with the game, because now we like already identified those as things we probably want to change. And so it's reinforcing that we like kind of know what we're doing so that we can like really give Unsent sort of like a good solid lift when we pick it back up again. And for our next game, like we feel pretty confident in our ability to like gut check our own like concept for game 2 and like what we think will be fun with a little bit more confidence than we had before.
That is all excellent. And yeah, it's like anything else. You get through something the first time and all of a sudden the next few steps or the next time around doesn't seem as scary or as daunting. So it sounds like that's definitely the case here. Well, congratulations off of all of that. I mean, just having that, being ahead of the curve in terms of what you were expecting in terms of traction and sales and attention has to be very gratifying and really encouraging. And I share that view of coming at it kind of overly pessimistically, almost in like a defensive sort of way, just because you really don't know how it's going to go. So that has to be really, really gratifying. One thing that I continue to loop on here is the idea of scope, which is always so incredibly important in whatever product work you're doing, so that you're hitting your deadlines properly, you're keeping things sustainable, etc. In game development specifically, it's about as important as it could be, given that defines your deadlines, whether you're meeting them or not, whether you're crunching, how hard you're crunching, all these different, kind of obvious things on the surface. But scope in practice is often much, much harder to achieve well in hand than it sounds. Oh yeah, we'll keep it simple, it'll be fine. And all of a sudden you start creeping and next thing you know, you're a year behind schedule. So not just with Unsent, but for other projects that are coming down the pipeline here, can you talk a little bit about that process of scoping from the business and the development perspective of keeping things manageable, of trying to balance things you want to do versus things you have time to do? Obviously I'm sure devs would love to put every idea they've ever had into it, but you have to make tough choices at some point. Again, it's the reality of the business. So can you talk a little bit about the value of proper scoping from your perspective, and again, how you've been putting it into practice here?
Sure. I mean, as the guy like bankrolling this whole thing, like proper scope is critical. Of like, I don't want to be late on deadlines. I want to make sure that like what we say we can deliver both to ourselves and to players is what we can deliver. And so working with essentially a rookie dev team, like that was something they were very nervous about when I came in. I was like, we're going to use Jira. We're going to estimate how long we think a card is going to take. We're going to measure how long the card actually took to take. And that way, like to finish. And that way, when we go build our second game, we're going to be a little bit better at scoping. And I think like the dev team overscoped a little bit. Like I think we said it in our early access announcement, like there is a plan for sort of these like mini side quests. They're calling them rifts. And there's like a whole nother level we want to build, like a big boss fight. So like they really wanted to get that in for the October deadline. And we just realized like basically 2 months ago, we like if we wanted the game to be like good and fun for early access, we were just going to have to cut that and come back to it. Which is disappointing, but also I think ultimately good, because we do get this chance to like test out what's good about the game and like lean into that for the last level in the boss fight. I do think that's probably the most critical skill that a team needs to be good at. And I think one of the pitfalls, I think, and that was hard for this dev team to work with, is like, we're doing Double Fine Studios did Amnesia Fortnite. I think they coined the term. We're doing that on Monday to figure out our next game. I'm encouraging the team to, like, we all need to pick a game that we like, but not one that we love. I think when you love the game you're building, you want it to be perfect, right? Like, you also, usually the things people love, they don't like sharing with other people. You want to keep that to yourself because you love it. You also don't want the thing that you love to change because that's why you love that thing. If you just like something, I want to share the things that I like with my friends. I want them to like it too. And if the thing that I like changes a little bit, for all I know, maybe I'll end up loving that thing, but I like it right now. And so I think it's hard when you're like in love with what you're building to scope and to like cut stuff out, because that's what you're so excited to build. If you just like what you're building, I think it's a little easier to be critical and like cut stuff. I think one of the things I've enjoyed in my career is like I'm finally at a point where like I kind of have enough of a resume, even though I look like I'm like 25. I think maybe I'm going a little gray with this business. Maybe I look a little older now, but I'm almost 40. But like I'm starting to mentor other companies and like help other CEOs. And it's so easy from an outsider's perspective to see what a company could be doing differently, or like what a CEO could be doing differently, and give them really constructive feedback. I think it's easier to do that. Like, I like these companies, I like these people, like, but I can give them very critical, like, hard feedback to get because I don't love them. Like, and so I think if you take that same approach to gaming of like, or like to building a game of like, I want to like what I'm doing, but not love it. Because if you love it, it's going to be too hard to trim it and to keep it in scope. And if you like it, it's going to let you be a little bit more critical of like, this isn't necessary for what is like the core game loop or the core mechanic or like the thing that we think is going to be the most fun. Like, it's easier to cut stuff if you don't love it as much, which is probably a hard thing, I think, for most indie devs to get to, because I think they all, you don't get into this industry unless you love games and you love the idea of the game that you're building. But I think it's really important to be able to like hold what you're building at an arm's length, and be critical of it, of like what can get cut without like gutting what you think is the best part of what you're building.
It is very much a passion-driven industry, more so than many others, especially given how creative it is. And I think that's a really prescient point where it can be difficult to take an objective look at something that is so precious to you, whatever the industry is, games or otherwise, and be able to make some of those critical decisions. So being able to have that sort of step back from whatever perspective it is and have a little bit more come at it from a more critical juncture is a super valuable skill to have. And sort of on that same token then, from kind of your perspective, this idea of leadership in general, in starting to understand how to make those difficult decisions, how to properly critique or find constructive criticism about something that's happening, creative endeavor, business endeavor, whatever it is, harnessing that, because it is a skill set, harnessing that leadership skill set and putting it into practice in ways that are constructive for the people who are receiving that feedback is, at least in my experience, a really delicate kind of art to get right. So again, given your experience with the many companies that you've sort of raised as your own and gotten out into the world, right? How do you find your approach to leadership helpful or successful in that context? How, and to extrapolate again on some of the points we've already had, how do you sort of go about approaching those sorts of things? We can use Unsent as an example, some of the other ones, in sort of harnessing that ability to steer something to get it to the best point it can possibly be at.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I've managed software engineers, which, like, I'd argue game developers are software engineers with like a different flavor or something. But like, it is, software engineering is definitely artistic, right? Like, many of the engineers I've worked with over the years are also musically talented. I think there's something, I guess, left-brained about it is artistic, right? And I think like artists, especially if you start looking at sort of like the personality traits of gamers and specifically like game developers, like you do see a lot more introverts. Like, I don't know if you've done, anyone's familiar with like the disc profiles. Like, if anyone is, they can probably already tell them high D, high I, low S and low C. A lot of like the engineers are high S and C, very thoughtful people who like take their time to respond to something. And I think like it is, you do need to like couch feedback in a like, I like this, I don't like this, but I also like this, right? The Oreo format's really important. But there's also the games that do well have magic, right? I think it was Carl Sagan who said, good technology is indistinguishable from magic. I'm going to attribute that one to Sagan. It could have been someone else. The thing about a good game is magic, and it's hard to put your thumb on what it is that made that game good. And so I think as a manager, as like a leader, you need to like figure out your like how to, and maybe I'll, as I'm talking, figure out how to verbalize this, but like you need to also be able to leave space for like the developer just thinks this is the best way to do it, and they can't verbalize why, and they can't point to data. It's just a gut feeling that this is the right thing to do. And at a certain point, I think you do have to trust your gut. But I think the other part of it, like that's sort of critical to our team here, was like being able to paint this bigger picture. And I think particularly with at least the indie studios I've spoken to, it's generally a younger demographic of people. And I do think like, as sort of the top end of the millennial, like I said, I'm almost 40. We care about why, and especially like the Zoomers or like Gen Z or whatever, like why we're doing something matters. And I think so. Something I'm very big on is pointing back to the mission. The mental health company that I run, like everything needs to be rooted in the mission. Like we are trying to give everyone preventative mental health checkups. If what we're doing doesn't push towards that or doesn't help towards that, we can probably not do it. I think with Red Rabbit Games, we're trying to build a model that we can then teach other indie studios how to run lean and efficient and like profitable. It doesn't need to be the flash in the pan multi-million-dollar Valheim, Schedule 1, Balatro. That's awesome if that happens, but like, is $1 million or $2 million enough? Like, yep, that's fine. Like, I'd be thrilled. So like, can we build a healthier model? And so a lot of what we're doing is like, just before this call, our creative director and director for the game messaged me being like, hey, Winter Steam Fest is coming up. We should put the game on sale. I'm like, we released this thing 2 days ago. I hate that the industry, like the people are waiting for the game to go on sale to buy. He's like, yeah, but like it gets in front of like hundreds of thousands, like 10,000, 20,000 eyeballs that it wouldn't normally get in front of because it's included on the winter like sale list. I'm like, oh, this pains me so much, but it's worth experimenting. Like we need to run this experiment and see what it does and see if it works and measure it and understand it. And so I think like in that then points us towards our big goal of like, if we know that like, yes, even though the game just came out, but you drop it on sale and like it actually moves the needle, like cool, we can teach other studios the same thing. And so like we're trying to root everything in mission. And I think with artists and like creatives, rooting it in the mission helps them get motivated. And you can't argue. You cannot argue with like, hey, this helps our mission, so we need to do it. Like I have not ever heard a valid reason for someone to be like, no, we shouldn't do it, even though it matches our mission that we've all agreed to. Like it's really hard to argue with like, this helps the mission, therefore we should do it. And so that's been helpful just in terms of like team alignment stuff. I'd say from a leadership standpoint, I'm very much, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm not going to ask anyone to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself. I can't code the way they can code. I've tried Unreal Engine. It looks so straightforward, but it's not. Like I can't do that stuff. And so like, while I'd like to roll up my sleeves and do it, like that stuff I just can't, but I can be the guy who's out buying coffee for the team. I can be the guy clearing up the trash can. I can be the guy who's like, something needs to get done. I'll put my hand up. I got this. You guys stay coding. And so I think I'm very much like, I'm going to lead by example. And like, if I can act like the lowest guy on the totem pole, it becomes easier to also be the highest guy in the totem pole of like, I would do this for me. Like I would do this for the business. So like you should too. There's that like people could Google image this one. Although I struggle to find this one every time I want to look it up, but there's it's done in the theme of like ancient Egyptian art. And it's like the pharaoh behind the desk, like cracking the whip as like the slaves pull the desk. And then there's one where it's like the manager's in front and there's an extra person and all four of them are like pulling the desk. Like I'd rather be that one than the one sitting behind the desk cracking the whip. And so that's been sort of my process of like, I want to be approachable. I don't want to be like the guy in the suit. I'm wearing like just I don't know what the hell the shirt is like, but like, we just need to be real people about it because ultimately it's people making the games, it's people playing the games. I think part of the magic is the people. And so I don't know. That's been sort of my personal style, like throughout Red Rabbit and other ventures as well.
Context is key. Lead by example. Two big takeaways from that, I think, and makes perfect sense. To put a nice bow on it then, especially in terms of what that future is looking like, there is a finish line for Unsent at some point in the future, and it will be kind of that fully formed, fully baked product when it gets there. So from your perspective and from the dev's perspective, what is left to do for the game to be considered quote unquote complete, and how are you going about getting there?
I'd say right now the game ends in a cliffhanger, which is either a really good thing or a really bad thing. In terms of like the human and like our COO, like very much disagreed with this decision the other day, but like the dev team basically came to me being like, we don't think the narrative is finished. And so like, we want to finish the narrative. I'm like, I can't really, like, I get it. Like the story needs to be told and it needs to end. And, we marketed the game as a story driven 3D platformer. And so like that needs to be part of it. And so the current plan with Unsent is to build these rifts, which are like, basically like, I don't know if you played like Split Fiction, but like the like side quests that you find there, they're essentially like side quests. And then we want to build one more level. It's going to be like casino themed. At least that's currently, we'll see what the players have to say about what sort of motifs they like and don't like. Someone on the dev team said every game needs a good casino game. So, or good casino level. So I think that might be part of what it is. But so the plan is to build a casino level and then like the big boss fight. You don't get to know who the boss is yet. That's all part of the cliffhanger. So that is the plan for Unsent. I think I mentioned like we are like putting it down for now to like get some feedback, let it breathe on the market, see what this Frankenstein baby grows into. And in that time period, we're going to build a second game. So we're spending 6 months trying to build out this other game, which like fits into sort of this accelerator model where like we want to get studios to their third game within 1 year. And so we need to prove before we go and ask to like accelerator teams to do it, we need to prove to ourselves that it's possible to build a good solid game in 6 months as your second game. Like now that we have the lessons from the first one, can we build a kick-ass second game? So that's our current hypothesis that we're testing. And then at that point, we're going to sit back down and figure out like, what do we do with Unsent? And then like, if the trend continues, I'm happy selling 120 units a day. That is fantastic. If that happens for the next 6 months, we'll probably build Unsent too. But at this point, like I think in 6 months we'll sit down and like, okay, what lessons do we learn from building game 2? And like, let's build a hypothesis for adding on to, and finishing the early access portion of, not like finishing the early access portion, but like getting Unsent to like 1.0 release. Like, what's our hypothesis there? And I don't know what that hypothesis is going to be yet. But that's the exciting part of like the startup world is like, okay, in 3 to 4 months when we're like basically in a good place with game 2 and we're trying to figure out what's next for Unsent, we start like sort of white boxing our own plan there. We're going to come up with a hypothesis of we think we can do this in 8 weeks, or we think we can do this in 6 weeks. We think we can get the price point to this and the playable hours to this. Let's go see if we can make that true. So that's, I'd say, like the pipeline for Unsent moving forward.
Excellent. All right. Lots to look forward to there. Last question then. If people do want to learn more, obviously it's on Steam, out in early access now. They want to learn more about Unsent itself, Red Rabbit Games, any combination of that. Where would you point people? Unsentgame.com.
We are currently doing UI UX work to redo it. So feel free to go there. You can also go to redrabbit.games, which I've gotten mixed feedback on that website too. So feel free to check that one out. There's lots of Easter eggs and fun little games to actually play on the site. It's themed like Windows XP. So your like computer isn't broken if you go there. It actually is like intentionally looking like a Windows desktop. So those are the best places to go if you just want information. But like we've got a Discord. I wish I knew how to get people on to join that one. That's above my pay grade. But we do have a Discord that like we welcome anyone and everyone onto. You can feel free to reach out on my LinkedIn. I think I'm just like /Matt G Rubin, probably, hopefully. Our socials, we've got people like all up on the socials. It's all these like, young Gen Z people. I'm like, you guys do the TikTok. I don't get it. But so they're like super responsive and engaging on our socials. And, I think the mindset I've taken with all of our companies is like, whatever our next customer is, we need to treat like our first customer. And so, I think that's sort of the approach we're taking with our community is like the people who are willing to engage with us are priceless. And like, if we can build a great relationship with the players, I think A, we're going to build great games for them, and B, like they're going to understand the process and who we are, and like know that there's actual humans behind this whole thing, building for them to have fun and like have that be that entertainment, that diversion from the stresses of everyday life. Like we want that to be awesome for you. And I think games are such a great, like it's not just sitting there mindlessly watching TV. It's like engaging and actively using your brain to problem solve. And like, it's such a good entertainment tool for me that I just want that shared with everybody. And so, yeah, like any engagement we can get, like we're grateful for. So, I mean, find us anywhere and we're happy to chat.